Imagine this. You're sitting inside a machine worth around $15 million, surrounded by buttons, switches, and dials. You're about to launch down a straight at over 200 miles per hour. There's a voice in your ear telling you to change engine modes, manage your tires, adjust your brake bias, and don't forget to save fuel while overtaking the guy in front of you. That's the world of a Formula One driver. But here's the question that fans rarely ask. Do F1 drivers actually understand these cars they drive? Do they truly know how they work, like engineers and mechanics do? Or are they just world-class pilots following instructions from the pit wall? It's a fascinating question, because in Formula One, knowledge is power. And the line between driving and engineering is blurrier than you think. So today, we're diving deep into the truth. How well do F1 drivers really know their cars? And fair warning, you might come out of this video with a brand new respect for just how smart and human these drivers really are. Segment 1, the myth versus the reality. Let's start with the myth. A lot of people, especially casual fans, think F1 drivers are just rich kids in fast cars. You know, people born into money who grew up with go-karts instead of bicycles. But that stereotype completely misses what actually goes on behind the scenes. Because modern F1 drivers? They're half driver, half engineer, half athlete, and honestly, half computer. Each car on the grid is a unique creation. Even though we call them all F1 cars, no two machines are truly identical. Every team builds their own, from the ground up, adjusting everything from aerodynamics, to power unit integration, to the chassis stiffness. So, when a driver sits in a car, they're not just getting behind the wheel. They're climbing into a one-of-a-kind prototype that's been built specifically for them, like a tailored suit, except it can reach 330 kilometers per hour. And here's the crazy part. The driver has to adapt to every tiny detail of that design. The shape of the steering wheel, the angle of the pedals, even the material used on the seat padding can completely change how the car feels on track. That's why you'll often hear a driver say something like, "The front end just doesn't feel right," or, "I don't have confidence under braking." It might sound like vague feedback to us, but to engineers, that's gold dust. That's how car setups evolve, through feel, not just data. Segment 2, the science of feedback. When an F1 race ends, most fans turn off the TV. But for the drivers, the real work is just beginning. They'll head straight to a debrief room, where they spend hours with a team of engineers going through every lap. And when I say hours, I mean hours. Sometimes past midnight. They review telemetry, tire temperatures, fuel consumption, braking points, every microscopic detail. But the most valuable input doesn't come from the data. It comes from the driver's brain. Drivers like Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, and Sebastian Vettel are legendary for their ability to give feedback that's so specific, engineers can practically use it as a GPS for fixing problems. Hamilton once said he can literally feel when the car's engine mapping isn't synchronized, a difference that would barely register in the numbers. Alonso has described how he can detect when the rear of the car has just a bit too much yaw mid-corner. We're talking about sensations that happen in milliseconds. Think about that. These guys are not just fast, they're analytically fast. Their brains are like high-speed sensors, trained to detect subtleties you and I couldn't even imagine. And the craziest thing? That kind of intuition doesn't come overnight. It comes from years, decades, even, of driving, failing, analyzing, and adapting. From the age of 6 or 7, these drivers are already developing the sensitivity needed to feel how grip changes, how balance shifts, and how tiny mechanical changes affect performance. Segment 3, not all drivers are the same. Now here's where it gets interesting. Not every driver approaches their car in the same way. Some are natural engineers. They live and breathe data. Others? They rely more on instinct and feeling. Take Nico Rosberg, for example. He was known for being one of the most technically involved drivers of his era. He used to spend days in the Mercedes simulator, analyzing data, comparing setups, and tweaking car settings himself. That's one reason he was able to beat Hamilton in 2016. He wasn't necessarily faster, but he understood how to optimize the car perfectly for his driving style. Now, compare that to Kimi Räikkönen, the Iceman. Kimi famously hated long debriefs. He'd give engineers the most straightforward feedback ever. Car is bad. Fix it. And yet, he could still extract performance that others couldn't. Because while Kimi didn't enjoy talking about why the car behaved a certain way, his natural feel was so good, he could adapt in real time. He didn't need to analyze it, he just knew. And then you've got Max Verstappen, who might be the perfect hybrid between instinct and intelligence. He has an insane feel for the car, but he's also deeply involved in technical discussions. Red Bull engineers often say Max will notice things before the telemetry shows them. That's how in tune he is. So it's not about being technical or instinctive. It's about finding that balance, the sweet spot between feel and feedback. Segment 4: The complexity of modern F1 cars. Let's take a step back and talk about how insanely complicated these cars are. The modern Formula One car is basically a rocket ship with wheels. You're looking at a hybrid power unit made up of 6 components. Yes, 6, including an internal combustion engine, 2 motor generator units, a turbocharger, an energy store, and control electronics. That's not even counting all the aerodynamic systems, brake-by-wire, or the complex ERS, energy recovery system. Now, imagine controlling all of that, while racing at full speed. The steering wheel alone has over 30 buttons and dials. Each one controls something different: differential settings, brake bias, engine modes, radio channels, DRS, fuel mixtures, tire temperatures, energy deployment, the list goes on. If you ever see onboard footage, watch how often drivers press buttons mid-corner. They're literally changing settings while fighting G-forces that could knock out the average person. In one race, Lewis Hamilton had to reset his car's hybrid system mid-lap by navigating through menus on the steering wheel, while still defending against Verstappen. That's like rebooting your laptop while skydiving. Segment 5: Famous stories that prove it. Here's where things get fascinating. Let's look at some real-life examples. 1. Michael Schumacher, the professor of precision. When Schumacher joined Ferrari in 1996, the team was struggling. But Michael wasn't just a driver, he was an engineer in disguise. He worked hand in hand with technical director Ross Brawn and designer Rory Byrne to develop the car. He'd test new parts, give specific feedback, and even tweak the ergonomics of his seat until everything was perfect. By the early 2000s, that partnership produced one of the most dominant F1 cars ever made. 2. Fernando Alonso, the human diagnostic tool. At McLaren in 2015, when the Honda power unit kept failing, Alonso famously told his engineers over the radio, "GP2 engine! GP2!" But what fans didn't see was how he'd later break down the exact problem, describing in detail how the hybrid system was deploying energy unevenly. The engineers checked the data later and realized he was spot on. 3. Sebastian Vettel, the detail freak. Sebastian Vettel, the detail freak. Vettel used to spend hours after races going over every line of telemetry. At Red Bull, he was known to give feedback so meticulous that it annoyed engineers at first, until they realized he was right almost every time. That attention to detail was a huge part of why he dominated from 2010 to 2013. Segment 6: What about the engineers? Now, it's important to remember, F1 isn't a one-man show. Drivers rely heavily on their race engineers, the people who interpret their feedback and translate it into mechanical adjustments. That's why the relationship between a driver and engineer is so sacred. Think of Hamilton and Bono, Verstappen and Gianpiero Lambiase, Alonso and Andrea Stella back at Ferrari. They're like co-pilots in a spaceship. When that communication works perfectly, magic happens. But when it doesn't, everything falls apart. You've probably heard heated radio messages. "Leave me alone, I know what I'm doing," or "Tell them to let me race." But that tension often comes from deep trust. It's not anger, it's intensity. Because in those moments, both sides are fighting for perfection. Segment 7: The Modern Balance, Data versus Instinct. In today's F1 world, everything is measured. Every lap, every gear shift, every millisecond of throttle is tracked by sensors. So, does that mean drivers are becoming less important? Not at all. If anything, their role is even more critical, because they're the only ones who feel the car in real time. The engineers see the data. The drivers live the data. That's the difference. Hamilton once said, "The car talks to me." And that's not just poetic, that's literal. The car is constantly communicating through vibrations, G-forces, tire grip, brake pressure. The driver translates that into human language engineers can work with. And as technology evolves, especially with AI and simulation tools, the drivers who can merge data and intuition will be the ones who dominate. Segment 8: Fan Interaction. Let's talk hypotheticals. So here's something to think about. If we took a driver from the 1990s, like Ayrton Senna or Mika Häkkinen, and dropped them into a 2025 F1 car, could they handle it? Senna was legendary for his feel, his ability to sense grip limits that others couldn't. But would that raw instinct be enough today? Or would modern systems, energy deployment, hybrid controls, overwhelm even a legend like him? Or, flip it around, what if today's drivers, like Lando Norris or Charles Leclerc, had to drive an old-school 1991 McLaren with no electronics, no power steering, and no data feedback? Would they still dominate, or would they struggle without the constant stream of information modern drivers rely on? Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take in the comments. OUTRO, the takeaway. At the end of the day, Formula One isn't just about who's fastest. It's about who understands their car best. Drivers today aren't just athletes, they're engineers, analysts, and communicators. They sit at the intersection of human instinct and machine precision. So the next time you see a driver adjusting a tiny dial mid-race, remember, that's not luck. That's a lifetime of training, learning, and mastering one of the most complex machines ever built. Because in Formula One, knowledge isn't just power. It's the difference between victory and defeat.